The day I signed my name on that contract, my hand was shaking. Not from nerves, from relief. 7 years. 7 years of 5 a.m. mornings, skipped vacations, eating lunch at my desk, and watching people younger and less qualified than me get promoted because they played golf with the right people. 7 years of proving, over and over, that I belonged in rooms I had to fight my way into. And now I had a number on paper that made it real. A licensing deal with Harman & Voss, one of the biggest commercial real estate development firms in the country. My architectural design firm, my tiny scrappy 2-person operation that I'd built out of a spare bedroom in my apartment, had just signed a $4.2 million contract to design the interior systems for their new mixed-use development in Austin. I remember sitting in my car in the parking garage after leaving the attorney's office. Just sitting there. The city hummed around me. I called my brother first. He didn't pick up. I called my mother. She let it ring. I drove home to tell them in person. That was my mistake. My family had always had a complicated relationship with my success. Complicated is a kind word. My older brother, I'll just call him my brother, had spent most of his adult life moving between jobs, borrowing money from our parents, and carrying a quiet bitterness that he dressed up as personality. He was charming at dinner parties. He was funny in the way people are funny when they're angry underneath it. And he had a talent I never understood until it was too late. He was very good at making my parents feel like whatever I had, I'd taken from him somehow. I don't know exactly when it started. Maybe when I got into architecture school and he didn't. Maybe when I paid off my student loans before 30 while he was still asking my parents for rent money. Maybe it was just always there, baked into the DNA of our family. The idea that there was only so much goodwill to go around, and I was always taking more than my share. My parents never said it out loud. They didn't have to. I could feel it in the way my mother changed the subject when I mentioned a project going well. In the way my father nodded slowly, like he was absorbing news about a stranger. I told myself it didn't matter. I had built something real. That would be enough. I pulled up to my parents' house just after 6 p.m. The lights were on in the kitchen. Through the front window, I could see my brother's car in the driveway. He'd moved back home 8 months earlier, temporarily, after his latest venture didn't pan out. My parents hadn't mentioned when temporary might end. I knocked even though I had a key. I don't know why. Force of habit. Some instinct that I needed permission. My mother opened the door. She looked at me the way she always did, like she was calculating something. "You look tired," she said. "I have news," I said. "Good news, really good news." I sat down at the kitchen table. My father came in from the living room. My brother appeared in the doorway holding a beer, leaning against the frame like he was watching a show he'd already seen. I told them about Harman & Voss. I told them about Austin. I told them about the $4.2 million spread across a multi-year engagement and the sub-licensing rights that could compound for years beyond that. I told them my firm was going to be real. Not just surviving. Real. There was a silence. My mother said, "That's a lot of money." My brother said, "Must be nice." My father nodded slowly. And then my brother pushed off the door frame and said something I have thought about every single day since. He looked at me and said, "You know none of this would have happened if Dad had just invested in my idea 2 years ago. You took that opportunity from me." I looked at him. I didn't understand what I was seeing. There was something behind his eyes. Not anger exactly. Something colder. "Congratulations," my mother said. But she said it to the table. I drove home that night with the windows down because I needed air. I told myself they just needed time to process. I told myself they were proud of me, in their way. I told myself a lot of things. 3 weeks later, I was in my office when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. It was an attorney. He told me that my brother had filed a civil claim against me. The claim alleged that the core design methodology I had used to win the Harman & Voss contract was based on intellectual property that belonged to my brother, a business concept he claimed to have shared with me privately 6 years ago, which I had allegedly developed and commercialized without attribution or compensation. I sat very still. "That's not real," I said. "The filing is real," he said. I hung up. I called my own attorney. I called her 3 times before she picked up, and when I told her what had happened, there was a pause on her end that scared me more than anything else I'd experienced that day. "Send me everything," she said. "Every email, every document, everything." What came next happened faster than I could process it. My brother had somehow gotten access to a series of emails that appeared to be from my work account, sent to a colleague of his 2 years earlier, discussing a design framework in terms that sounded eerily similar to the methodology I had developed. I had never sent those emails. I had never met his colleague. But the metadata, the digital fingerprints, someone had been very careful. My attorney told me the word I was afraid to hear: forged. At the same time, Harmon and Voss received a letter from my brother's attorney, suggesting that the intellectual property underpinning our contract was under dispute. They didn't pull the contract. Not yet. But they froze the first payment. They said they needed clarity before funds were released. They said they were sure this would resolve quickly. I understood what was happening. My brother didn't need to win. He just needed to make enough noise to make me look unstable. He just needed the deal to fall apart. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating properly. I was running on coffee and tear, and the particular kind of grief that comes from being hurt by someone who is supposed to love you. I called my mother. I told her what he was doing. I told her about the forged emails. I told her that her son was trying to destroy 7 years of my life with fabricated evidence. She said, "Maybe there was a miscommunication. You know how he gets." I said, "Mom, he forged documents." She said, "You've always been so dramatic." I put the phone down. I want to be honest about what those weeks felt like, because I think people assume that if you're strong, if you're smart, if you're built something real, you don't fall apart. You do. You absolutely do. I cried in my car outside my office because I didn't want my one employee, a brilliant young woman named Priya, who had believed in this company enough to take a below-market salary, to see me come undone. I made promises to myself that I immediately broke. I drafted emails to my parents that I deleted without sending. I lay awake at 3 a.m. doing math in my head, calculating how long I could keep the office open if the Harmon and Voss payment stayed frozen. Calculating when I would have to let Priya go. Calculating how much of my savings I could liquidate before I'd be back to zero. The version of me that had sat in that parking garage feeling the relief of 7 years finally paying off. She felt very far away. And then something shifted. I don't know exactly what it was. Maybe it was hitting the bottom of the fear. Maybe it was a Tuesday morning when I was sitting at my desk and I looked at the contract, the real one, with my real signature, representing work that was actually mine, and something went cold and clear in my chest. He used forged documents. That meant there was a trail. You can't fabricate digital evidence without leaving marks if someone looks hard enough. And I was going to make sure someone looked. I hired a digital forensics consultant. Her name was Dr. Reyes, and she was the kind of person who spoke in complete sentences about things I barely understood and made me feel, for the first time in weeks, like there might be a floor beneath me. We also pulled in a litigation attorney who specialized in IP fraud, not just a civil attorney, but someone who had worked cases with the FBI's cybercrime division. He understood immediately what we were looking at. Not just a civil dispute. A fraud. Potentially a federal crime. We spent 6 weeks building the case. The forged emails had inconsistencies in the server metadata that didn't match my email provider's actual log architecture. The timestamps had been manipulated, but not perfectly. There were microsecond discrepancies that required forensic tools to detect, but once you saw them, they were unmistakable. More importantly, the design framework my brother claimed I had stolen from him didn't actually exist in any form prior to my own work. His documentation of the concept was itself fabricated, created after the fact using templates pulled from publicly available sources, with date stamped that had been manually altered. Dr. Reyes compiled everything into a report. It was 94 pages long. In the meantime, I did something else. My brother and I had spoken exactly once since the filing. A brief, awful phone call in which he had been calm in a way that felt practiced. Too calm. During that call, without telling him what I was doing, I asked him questions. I asked him to walk me through his memory of the conversation he claimed we'd had 6 years ago, where he alleged he'd shared his concept with me. I let him talk. I let him describe a dinner that I remembered very differently, a whiteboard sketch that I had no memory of, a handshake agreement that had apparently occurred in a restaurant I had only been to once, and not with him. I recorded the call. In my state, I had looked up the law. One-party consent. Legal. He contradicted himself 4 times in 12 minutes. I noted every one. The civil hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in March. I didn't tell my parents I was going to be there. They knew about the case. They had, it turned out. help my brother pay for his attorney. A fact I discovered through discovery documents, and that landed somewhere deep and quiet in me, in a place I didn't visit during the weeks of preparation, because I couldn't afford to. I arrived with my attorney and Dr. Reyes. I wore a gray suit I had bought for a client presentation 2 years earlier. And I remember looking at myself in the bathroom mirror that morning and thinking, whatever happens today, you did the work. You always did the work. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. My brother was already there with his attorney when I walked in. He saw me. Something moved across his face. Surprise, maybe. He had expected, I think, that I would send a representative, that I would be too afraid to show up myself. I sat down at the plaintiff's table. I looked straight ahead. My parents came in 7 minutes later. My mother saw me first. She stopped walking. My father walked into her and then he looked up and saw me too. I had not spoken to them in 6 weeks. I had not explained what I was bringing into that room. They sat down behind my brother. I did not turn around. My attorney presented the forensics report first. Dr. Torin Reyes was called as an expert witness and walked the judge through the metadata analysis in the kind of precise, measured language that leave no room for interpretation. The timestamps were fabricated. The server logs were inconsistent with any authentic email transmission. The email headers contained encoding artifacts that only appeared in documents created using a specific third-party spoofing tool, a tool that, when subpoenaed, provided records showing an account registered to my brother's address. The judge asked several clarifying questions. My brother's attorney objected twice. Both objections were overruled. Then my attorney played the recording of my phone call with my brother. In the recording, my brother described our alleged dinner conversation as taking place on a Thursday evening. In his sworn deposition, he had said it was a Saturday. He described the restaurant as being on the north side of the city. In his deposition, he'd said downtown. He said I had drawn something on a napkin. He had previously claimed it was him who drew it. Small inconsistencies, each one of them, but stacked together, in a room with a federal-level fraud charge now attached to the civil case. They were not small. His attorney asked for a recess. During the recess, I stood in the hallway and drank water from a paper cup, and Priya, who I had brought with me, who had driven 4 hours to be there, stood next to me and didn't say anything, which was exactly right. When we went back in, my brother's attorney announced that his client was withdrawing the civil claim. But that wasn't the end of it, because the fraud referral had already been filed. The criminal investigation moved at a pace entirely separate from my ability to control it, which was both frustrating and, ultimately, correct. I gave my statements. I provided every document. Dr. Reyes provided her report to the DA's office. The attorney who had helped my brother with the technical aspects of the fabrication, a man I had never met, a contact of his from a former job, was identified through the subpoena records. He cooperated. My brother was charged with fraud and forgery. He was also charged with tortious interference with the business contract, which is a civil cause of action I pursued separately. He pleaded guilty 8 months later. He received 30 months of probation, a significant fine, and a civil judgment in my favor of $380,000, representing the losses I had incurred during the period when Harmon and Voss had frozen my payment, including Priya's delayed salary, consultant fees, and documented business interruption losses. Harmon and Voss released the first payment the week the civil claim was withdrawn. They sent a letter along with it. The managing partner wrote, "We never doubted the quality of your work. I have kept that letter. I want to tell you about the moment I found out my parents had known. Not everything. I don't believe they understood the full scope of what my brother had done. But I found out, through the course of the civil discovery process, that my brother had told them he was just trying to get what he was owed. And they had said nothing to me. They had watched me fall apart over 6 weeks, had heard me crying on the phone to my mother about forged documents, and they had said nothing, because somewhere in their minds, what my brother was doing felt, to them, like a reasonable attempt at fairness. I have thought a lot about what to do with that. I didn't confront them dramatically. There was no scene. I called my mother one evening, about a month after the hearing, and I told her what I knew. I told her quietly and without crying, which surprised me. I told her that I understood she loved my brother. I told her that I understood she had probably told herself she was staying out of it. I told her that choosing not to warn me was a choice, and that it had consequences, and that one of those consequences was that I needed distance from them for a while. Not forever, maybe, but for now. She started to say something about family and forgiveness. I thanked her for listening, and I said goodbye. I haven't spoken to my father since the discovery documents came in. I may again. Someday. I don't know. What I know is this. Priya is still with me. We hired 2 more people in the fall. We opened a second project with a firm in Denver, smaller than Harmon and Boss, but meaningful. And mine in a way that feels clean. I sleep through the night now, mostly. I bought a houseplant, which sounds small, but for 2 years I had refused to buy one because I wasn't sure I'd be staying. I've also started mentoring through a program that supports women in architecture and design who are in the early years of building their own firms. I show up to those sessions, thinking about the version of me that was sitting in a parking garage, feeling the weight of 7 years lift. And I think about all the things I didn't know were coming. And I think, this is what you do with that. You pass the information forward. You tell the next person, build the paper trail. Know your rights. Record what is legal to record. Hire the right people. Don't mistake silence for support. And when someone tries to take what you built, you make them prove it. Because they can't. The work is real. It has always been real. They just needed me to doubt it long enough to give up. I didn't. I've been thinking a lot lately about the word deserve. My brother said it the night I told my family about the contract. Must be nice. And underneath that, the implication that I had taken something. That my success was subtraction. That for me to have, he had to lose. I used to try to argue against that math. I used to think that if I explained myself clearly enough, if I showed my work, if I was patient and generous and careful with his feelings, eventually the people who loved me would see what was real. I spent years being careful with his feelings. What I wasn't doing during all those years was being careful with mine. Here's what I actually believe now, having come out the other side of the worst year of my life. The choices we make under pressure are the most honest version of us. Not the face we put on at family dinners. Not the version we perform when everything is fine. The version that shows up when there is something real at stake. That's who we are. My brother, when there was something real at stake, chose to fabricate. He didn't just lie to me. He constructed a false history, falsified timestamps, created digital evidence of conversations that never happened, and then watched me fall apart for 6 weeks while knowing exactly what he had done. That required sustained effort. It required him to wake up every morning and recommit to it. That is not a mistake or a moment of weakness. That is character, expressed under pressure. And my parents, when there was something real at stake, chose silence. Which is also a choice. I don't say any of that with bitterness anymore. I say it because I think it matters. The idea that your actions accumulate into something. Every time you choose honesty when lying would be easier. Every time you do the work when cutting corners is available. Every time you protect someone else's well-being when it costs you something. That builds into a kind of structural integrity that holds when things get hard. And every time you do the opposite, something erodes. Slowly until one day you're in a courtroom watching a forensics report dismantle the story you built, and there's nothing underneath you. What saved me wasn't luck. It was the paper trail I'd kept for 7 years without knowing I'd need it. It was Priya, who had seen me build this thing from nothing and knew it was real. It was Dr. Reyes, who treated the truth like it was recoverable, because it was. The truth is almost always recoverable, if you are willing to do the work of finding it. I think about the women I mentor now. Young architects, some of them barely past their first client, some of them already dealing with people who want to diminish what they're building. I tell them, document everything. Not because you expect betrayal, but because clarity is a form of self-respect. Know your rights, build relationships with people who have seen you work. And when someone tries to take what is yours, don't disappear. Show up. Place the evidence on the table. Make them reckon with what is real. The contract was always mine. The work was always mine. What took me the hardest year of my life to learn is that I didn't need anyone's permission to know that. I just needed to stop waiting for it.